ช่วงนี้เราจะได้พบกับกรณีศึกษาจากประเทศอินโดนีเซียค่ะกับการเสนอรายงานวิจัยในหัวข้อตำนานของวัฒนธรรมการไม่รู้หนังสือกรณีของเด็กอินโดนีเซียโดยรองศาสตราจารย์เซดิโอโน สุกิฮาโต อัตมาจายา Catholic University ประเทศอินโดนีเซียค่ะ
Good morning. It's really an honor for me to be able to come to Bangkok and to present some of the perspectives in literacy, which is specifically situated in Indonesian context. The title that I would like to discuss has to do with the myth of non-literate culture. And I focus specifically on the case of Indonesian children. As you know, Indonesian culture is generally acknowledged that it belongs to an oral culture rather than a literate culture. Literate in the case of reading and writing. And the claim by the local media in Indonesia is that Indonesia has the highest illiteracy rates. In 1995 till 2005, it has been recorded that adult literacy rates hit over 90%. And then the most recent claim, children illiteracy rates increases every year. And it has also been reported that Indonesian children are not keen on making reading as their habit. The present government's efforts to combat illiteracy right now under the incumbent President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono is that their sort of reading campaign, that is the establishments of community libraries as well as mobile libraries. However, despite these laudable efforts, it remains controversial as to whether illiteracy rates in Indonesia have decreased. In fact, the governments claim that the number of illiterate people decreases is often at odds with that of non-governmental organizations which monitor educational activities in Indonesia. In fact, these organizations never acknowledge the government's claim. In these presentations, I argue that the lingering illiteracy problem, which causes people, especially children, to be able to read and write, as well as problems related to children's literacy development in general, has nothing to do with a cultural aspect. That is, the culture of the children in Indonesia is oral rather than literate. And I also argue that these problems are due to severely limited access to books. As you know, in many regions in the country's provinces, many children live under poverty, and thus they have little opportunities of attending schools and enjoying access to reading. And in addition, educational programs are not supportive in enhancing children's literacy development. I therefore propose that providing more access to libraries is the first necessary step to combat illiteracy, and that children literacy development can be best facilitated not only by giving them access to books, but also continuously encouraging them to do what is called in self-sponsored reading, or what American linguist Stephen Creyson called free voluntary reading. I conclude by discussing the relationship between illiteracy and access to libraries. So I would like to debunk the commonly perception that Indonesian is, particularly children, are oral culture. They belong to oral culture instead of literate culture. I have documented some evidence coming from various sources. And the first, I would like to say that many children, especially those living in remote areas, are illiterate. That is, they are unable to read and write. And that many children are not accustomed to reading activities. I will explore the reasons in the next discussions. And it is also true that many children coming from middle and high income families are loath reading books. But I argue that this shouldn't be hastily inferred, that these children belong to a non-literate culture, or that they lack a reading habit. Indonesian student named Stoltz, there is a student from one of junior high schools in Indonesia, provides an interesting testimony which prove what I call the power of reading. Stoltz attributed her writing improvement to reading. She dubbed herself as a Potter alcoholic. That is, she loves reading Harry Potter. And the students credited her improvement in writing in English. And she managed to have her paper, her article, published in an English newspaper in Indonesia. And she never learned how to write at school. In fact, she hated learning how to use punctuations, how to use grammar. Here is her testimony. I also learned to love writing through fiction. And because of fiction, I look forward to writing school essay reports, where previously I loathed them. So Stoltz, in other words, acquired her ability to write with grammar, with good grammar, her ability to use English vocabulary, as well as the ability to understand writing conventions, not through writing, not through the instructions of writing at school, but through her self-exposure to reading. This is fiction reading. Now, I also observe that Indonesian children are avid readers, basically. They spend most of the time reading outside of schools. The students regularly visit bookstores at weekend, enthusiastically selecting and picking up books they wish to read from the store's bookshelves. The books they read come from a variety of genres. Can be fairy tales, comics, teenage novels, as well as a series of popular science. Furthermore, children and youngsters often flock to mobile libraries and community reading playgrounds to borrow and read books. And the students also passionately come to the library because they enjoy reading in groups with their peers and sharing what they read to each other. It is also interesting to observe that while most students are not really eager in doing school reading assignments, they love killing their time during the school break by doing pleasure reading or reading comics, teenage novels, and magazines. Even university students also love reading what children normally read. When asked what they read, they are never ashamed of admitting they consume light reading instead of academic literature. So, as a non-native speaker of English, I must admit that my ability to speak in English, my ability to write and to read in English can be attributed to my exposure to reading. I was brought up in a very small village in Indonesia precisely in central Kalimantan, or people knows it Borneo. I was at the time attending elementary schools, and I have no access to books in my village. But fortunately, my school had a very small library where the students can borrow and then can borrow and read books. But at that time, there was hardly books written in English. So I consumed only books written in Indonesian. Maybe you wonder, how could I be able to read English as well as to write English? I will explain this later. And the evidence that I have just presented, that is from Stolt and from my observations, suggests that Indonesian children are actually avid readers. And that the prevailing perception that Indonesian children, in particular and Indonesian people in general, lack reading habit is just a sheer myth. However, it is common to hear that young children don't like reading, as the previous scholars have just presented, is that it is also common for Thai people not to read. But I would like to say here that it is common to hear that young children don't like reading. They often ignore reading materials exhorted by their teachers and parents. That is, they tend to ignore books that adults and teachers think are quality literature. However, we cannot interpret it and even generalize that students lack a reading habit. The problem is that they lack a reading habit, but they just don't like what is offered to them. My research and other scholars have found that pedagogical and literacy practices in Indonesia context fail to play a facilitative role in assisting children to nurture their potential as readers. They fail to recognize that every child is in fact a reader. Also, schools create the false impression that reading is serious academic genre and other demanding literature from the early years of learning offer cognitive advantages. And yesterday, the Thai scholars also advised us not to push our children, not to impose our children with very serious genre, serious literature, which is usually imposed by their schools. Teachers, however, feel obliged to compel students to finish reading textbooks as prescribed in the curriculum. This happens in our context, Indonesia. In addition, parents are always apprehensive when they see their children reading books which have no direct relevance to school curriculum. The fear is that children will not receive good grades. Children will make no school progress. And the most that the parents worried is that students even fail in the exams if they rarely read school textbooks. Such an apprehension is understandable because light reading, that is reading comics, teen romances, and novels, do not directly contribute to students' academic achievement. Light reading activities, it is believed, offer no academic values and contribute little to intellectual growth. Light reading has also been accused of inhibiting students' path to heavier reading. In short, light reading can disrupt children's patience in reading academic literature. Evidence, however, from research on literacy has debunked this widely held assumption, demonstrating that light reading has a pedagogical value and determines academic success. See, for example, a research done by a Korean scholar, Kyung-Suk Cho, as well as American scholar, Chinese scholar, examining various studies on the effects of light reading on literacy development. Stephen Crescens and Joanne Uji have come to the following conclusion. Light reading promotes literacy in general. Light reading leads to heavier reading. That is, light reading serves as a path for heavier reading. Now, two important points that I have to highlight from the previous discussions by both the Thai scholars as well as the Singaporean and then the Korean scholars is that when we promote readings to children, we need to lower our expectations of them. We should not impose books which burden their cognitive load. And secondly, reading should be pleasant. So light reading can also be considered a pleasure reading. That is, Stephen Crescens calls it FVR, free voluntary reading. That is reading because one wants to. Readings without any obligations. Reading without being imposed by. There is in fact innumerable reassuring evidence bearing testimony to the pedagogical benefits of free voluntary reading. The evidence comes from psychology as well as comes from linguistics point of view. Light reading such as comic books has been found to be linguistically appropriate, with the illustrations in the book making the text comprehensible. So it has no negative effects on language development and school environment. It serves as a conduit to heavier reading. Moreover, other examples of light reading, such as teen romances and magazines, have been shown to offer valuable input and motivations for doing more reading. However, by presenting the evidence of light reading, it does not necessarily imply that light reading alone is adequate to attain advanced levels of development. It is, however, serves as mediating variables that can accelerate literacy development. Given the valuable insight generated from second language acquisition research, confirming the efficacy and the insights of free voluntary reading, then FVR provides both the motivations for more reading and the linguistic competence that makes harder reading possible. It thus seems wise if we consider it as one plausible alternative in promoting a reading culture to our children. Now, if research supports the efficacy of free voluntary reading, I would like to propose that free voluntary reading be one of the agenda in promoting reading culture to our children. But there is always a trade-off between what we want to have children read, to be able to read, with the school's curriculum. But this is a challenge that we have to face, however. Schools oftentimes are very ambitious in their efforts to equip students with literacy competence, causing students to bear an overwhelming cognitive demands.
Not only does this ambitions create a high anxiety learning environment, but such policy is also counterproductive because it hinders children's efforts to become autonomous language acquirers. So the goal of language acquisitions, both first language acquisition and second language acquisition, is that we want our children to become autonomous language acquirers. Parents also fear that their children will fail school exams or get poor grades. They often exhort their children to read school textbooks, often very demanding school textbooks. In many cases, to realize their ambitions, parents often persuade their children to read and focus more on school textbooks by offering rewards. There seems to be nothing wrong with direct exhortation, provided that children like reading textbooks. However, we need to be cautious that the direct encouragement can backfire unless the reading material is not interesting and meaningful to children. By giving reward to children, we also must be careful because rewards can also have a long-term damaging and harmful effects. Because by, in quotation, bribing children with extrinsic rewards, we divert children's attention from the fact that reading is by itself an intrinsically pleasant activity. My 4-year-old son, I never bribe, in quotations, I never bribe my 4-year-old son. I never offer reward to my sons to impose a reading culture to my son. And the scholar from the Korean, Miss Lailin, is correct when she argued that it is not the responsibility of the mother who read the books to their children, but it is also the responsibility of the father. I provided my sons with a book, the books that they like. He likes very much. The books which has to do with a short story depicting very interesting characters. And initially my wife read the book to my son, but I'm aware that because my wife is also quite busy, and she has no time to read the books, and I take the role as a father to read books to my son. And interestingly, my son loves reading because he likes being read the book. And right now, I don't have to be, because he tries to gain confidence in reading, because he loves reading storybooks. So right now, I don't have to read the books for my children, for my son. And my son now reads the book to me, especially before bedtime. So the idea that reading is pleasant is no exaggeration. In fact, reading is an activity that children and adults resort to in order to escape a boring daily routines. Let me provide a direct quotations from Nell. There is an American scholar. Nell says like this: conversations after a time bores me. Games tire me, and my own thoughts have a tendency to run dry. Then I fly to my books as the opium smoker to his pipe. So if we are eager to create kids' reading culture, then the first possible step to take, in my view, is to discover what books children love most, and then to provide them with books to suit their interests and needs. We call this book flood. So if necessary, we need to set an example by reading in our spare time. This can create the impression that reading is indeed a pleasant activity. Now, Wang and Lee also confirm based on their research. They point out that easy access to interesting reading material is one of the most obvious conditions to be met if children are to develop reading habits. Other conditions include developing enthusiasm for reading and developing enough competence to start reading. So the first step, in my view, then, to help them develop a love for reading, to develop a enthusiasm in reading books, rather than imposing with books which have a very heavy cognitive load. When access to interesting and comprehensible books is made possible, children are beginning to develop a feeling of familiarity and enthusiasm for books. They will get hooked on books. They become savvy in choosing what to read, and they will eventually become a good storyteller. My 4-year-old son now becomes a good storyteller because of reading. Research also finds that children who do extensive free reading eventually choose what experts have decided are good books, and that they gradually expand their reading interests as they read more. Even without parents' exhortation, children are keen on picking up books and on discovering their own reading strategies. It is at this point that parents need to give them freedom to decide books on various genres, and more importantly, to encourage them to be the authority in choosing the books. Indonesian scholar named Rosita has found in her research, the more freedom the students are given to choose light reading materials, the greater the chance they will have to improve their literacy competence. In essence, free voluntary reading is a kind of reading which is done for one's pleasure, for one's recreational purposes, and for one's own purposes. Light reading arouses a child's interest that sustains them until they are linguistically mature enough to read more challenging or demanding academic texts. And then it has also been argued that once reading habit in the first language develops, students will become avid readers. That is, the ability in reading in the first language will facilitate the understanding of reading in the second language. We can therefore summarize the importance of free voluntary reading for literacy in a single sentence. Doing light reading may be insufficient for causing further literacy growth, but the habit of reading per se lingers until the reader is linguistically and cognitively mature enough to consume heavy reading materials. In other words, light reading paves the way to heavy reading. Now, I would like to address the problems of the illiteracy in my context, that is Indonesia. I would like to test the assumptions, actually, and I would like to confirm the assumption that better access to books at home and at schools results in more reading. And the more one reads, the better one's literacy development. Also, easy access to public libraries not only increases enthusiasm for reading, but also affects how much children read. The problem here in Indonesia is that not all children are lucky enough to enjoy access to books. In big cities in Indonesia, where access to books like bookstores, public libraries are easy to find, the number of illiterate children tends to be lower in rates than those coming from poor regions. Similarly, children born and raised by high-income families have been flooded with books at home, and interestingly, at early ages of learning, they acquire their first language faster. Moreover, children from the opulent family can afford to go to buy books from bookstores, making them read more and more. Also, these children have the privilege to attend good quality schools, which are well equipped with classroom and school libraries. With such a privilege, children from this high-income family develop their literacy skills much earlier and faster than those coming from the poor families. Apart from the easy access in big cities in Indonesia, the problem is that only big cities which get a priority in enjoying access to educational budget from the central government. So for instance, the establishments of community libraries and mobile libraries, which is part of government's program to promote a reading campaign, still takes place in big cities and has yet to reach underprivileged region in the country. And as I have argued elsewhere, the most pressing need that the government should take to prevent children and youth illiteracy is to build more community libraries in remote regions with high illiteracy rates. The latest data that I got from the Indonesian Ministry of Education's report for the Educations for All of Global Monitoring Report, Literacy for Life, show that only 5% of some 70,000 villages in Indonesia have community libraries, only 5%, with no available reports on the numbers of books. In my view, then, the most realistic and viable strategic plan the Indonesian government should make to fight illiteracy is to enrich the print environment. That is, to provide access to community libraries equipped with compelling reading materials and with trained librarians. With the Indonesian government commitment to improving the quality of national education, such a plan is certainly feasible. As a conclusion, I would like to say that when the print environment is enriched, more reading is done. The more books children have at home, the more they read. And schools and classrooms equipped with better libraries encourage more reading and create children's reading culture. Access to public libraries not only results in more reading, but also greatly increases enthusiasm for reading. Finally, the richer the print environment, the better the literacy development. With this insight, it becomes clear that continuous efforts to fight
and in the societies in general. Through this means, it seems enough to guarantee the establishment of children reading culture. Thank you very much. I will show the conditions in Indonesia. Here is the conditions in remote regions to prove that children are actually avid readers. The problem is that they don't have yet opportunity to enjoy more access to reading. So here in the second picture, children in remote regions are flocking to mobile libraries. They are very enthusiastic in reading. You can see the second picture here, but still mobile libraries are very limited in these regions. Here is a sort of community playground. This is maybe it's not as luxurious as reading club in Singapore, for instance. But what I would like to emphasize is that I would like to emphasize, even though these students read in this reading club, they are very enthusiastic. This is what I would like to debunk, the myth of illiterate culture. Here are also children are sharing with each other the books. They have to share with each other. They don't even have a lot of access to books. Sometimes they have to share with each other because of very limited books available. Here is called smart car. Mobil pintar means smart car. And again, school children are flocking to this mobile library in order to read the books. I think that's all for my presentation today. I thank you very much for your attention.